While the Stanford faithful would strive for more, certainly with the defensive stops in 2 of the last 3 Sun Bowls to conclude the season and wrap up a Holiday Bowl game is better than most accomplished at the end of their seasons across the country. We bring in Don Kane to break down Stanford football as the Cardinal nip the Pitt Panthers 14-13. Donald, how you doing today?
Fantastic, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. And you just told me that while I was recording and doing some other things and tracking other games and recording that I didn't necessarily miss a whole lot.
Nope.
I took in that first half, and I didn't have to take a whole lot of notes. There weren't offensive fireworks just keeping me glued to the screen, but you slugged it out for the win.
Yeah, the second half was just like the first half, except that Penn's offense was a little more anemic than it had been in the first. Stanford's offense was basically exactly the same. They put together 2 drives in the entire game, scored a touchdown on each, one on the luckiest fumble slash, QB wannabe pass for a touchdown that I've ever seen in my entire life. But it's just they had those 2 drives, and Stanford's defense, to its credit, did stand tall, probably aided by the injury to the other one of Pitt's stud running backs. I was sorry to see that kid have to go out so early in the first half, but there wasn't a whole lot fun about that game from a viewing standpoint. But good grit, I guess, out of the Stanford team, and in particular, the defense stood up. If they played like that earlier in the season, might have been a different outcome, for the 2018 Cardinal.
Concerning a different outcome possibly for this 2018 campaign, hold that thought. We'll get to it in just a second. So what I saw was that Pitt certainly didn't take over the game at any stretch, or the score would have been different. But they looked like maybe a little bit more determined, more physical team for much of it.
Yep.
And you mentioned Kadri Allison, who a side note to his career, unfortunately, it ends here. He was actually the guy that took over for James Conner when he was first diagnosed and took over the Pitt running back position. We're going back to like 2015, 2016, and had a 1,000-yard season. Then he was displaced, and now he's come back. He's had a very odd career, but hopefully he's fine. And Pitt being who Pitt is, much like who Stanford is, in a somewhat similar way. His last carry, or second to last carry of the game, was a 3rd and 10 in which they just said, we're running the ball off tackle. Here you go. And he runs for a first down to keep that drive alive that made it eventually 3-0. But Stanford just looked a little bit behind the action for much of the game.
Yeah, slow out of the tunnel for whatever reason. And honestly, there's not really much of an excuse for that. It's going to be the last game of your season, no matter what. But looked really, really sleepy. 5 3-and-outs in the first half. That's not really the way you want to do it to win a football game. But like I said, that 4th drive that went down the length of the field, punched it in the end zone, scored a touchdown with Scarlett. And then got a little bit better in the second half from an offensive standpoint. A little bit of creativity, particularly on that last play to earn that last first down to enable Stanford to go into victory formation and go ahead and run the clock out. That was a good call. Would have loved to have seen something like that sooner. That end around to Michael Wilson went for 9 yards, and that ended the game for all intents and purposes. I don't want to be totally Debbie Downer. Let's talk about a couple of the upsides. Cameron Scarlett had a fantastic game subbing for the miss due to surgery Bryce Love. One of the better games of his entire collegiate career as a senior. So good for him. Went for 95 yards, just a tick under 100, scored both touchdowns, including the game winner. Paulson Adebo continued to be great. They didn't even try to throw at him. Elijah Holder got caught for a penalty or 2. But he hung in there and played pretty well throughout as well. So, and of much note, both the offensive line and defensive line for Stanford looked pretty good in the second half.
So what seemed to spark this team, at least for that one touchdown drive, the first one, was they got a pass to the tight end on the screen. Then they got this run from, I didn't know who this kid was, Darian Maddox.
Dorian Maddox.
Like half the team.
He's been in the program forever. And, we have seen flashes from him. If you've watched the spring games, I understand from a former player, he was a beast on the scout team. He's been doing it, within the program. I believe he's a senior this year. So, he's played all 4 years on campus. He's been he's one of those dudes on your team who helps the defense kind of get ready to face a hard running, running back, that's got some pop to him from the opposing squad. And, for the most part, nobody knows these people's names. I remember seeing him twice during spring football. I think this past spring and 2 years ago, I think coming out of his true freshman year, and thinking, who in the world is this guy? I mean, he looks incredible. Now, there was a couple other pretty good backs in front of him, and McCaffrey his freshman year, and Love over the last couple, and Scarlett on all the short yardage stuff, and as a very capable all-purpose backup to Bryce Love, as he showed all day today. But Maddox looked fantastic, and apparently he's flashed it, just has not been able to find the field during the regular season throughout his career.
We've got Don King on the line to break down Stanford football as the Cardinal wrap up the season with a Sun Bowl victory over Pitt, 14-13, and they did much of the same with the late stop against Mitchell Trubisky, with Solomon Thomas making the play on a 2-point conversion try.
That's right.
2 years ago at the Sun Bowl as well, defeating North Carolina. David Shaw had made a comment. Apparently, I didn't hear it directly out of his mouth, but it was talked about during the broadcast, Don, that he thought that Notre Dame game somewhat turned the season. It was a very competitive game for 3 quarters. Notre Dame ran away with it in the 4th quarter in what I think was a 17-point win. What is your assessment of David Shaw kind of projecting that game having more of just a one-loss impact on the season, but possibly changing just the approach and the mindset of the players and some momentum impact the wrong way for the rest of the campaign?
Yeah, I love Coach Shaw. I thought that was a really overly optimistic take on the course that the season took. They're just, there were too many injuries, which nobody can do anything about, to key personnel, particularly along the offensive line. It was, they were shuttling all year long, and it was problematic. No Nate Herbig for much of the year, and no Nate Herbig today as he prepares for the NFL draft. And whoever gets him to play on Sundays is going to get a good one. You can't coach size, and the dude is massive, but he's also a bit nasty, and he's a great player, who can play both guard positions or center, and he even spent some time at right tackle this season. So, he's going to be a great player at the next level. But without guys like him for a huge chunk of the season, things were different. When he would come back into the lineup, you're like, oh, where's this been? Oh, that's right. Our second team, our first team freshman All-American offensive guard from 2 years ago hadn't been playing, and it makes that big a difference. On top of that, what I remember from the Notre Dame game was having seen Stanford escape with the win against Oregon, which by most rights we should not have had. We got pushed around all night that game and had a huge scoop and score to get back in it, and then came back and then had Cristobal make a tremendous time management coaching error that I would imagine he will never again make for as long as he's a head coach. And we rode that to squeak out a win at Oregon in overtime, on a great pass breakup at the end of the game. I think Notre Dame was just that much better than us, and they just finally were able to establish their will in the 4th quarter and pull away. That game was not particularly close, and I'll be honest, watching it, I didn't feel at any point like we were actually going to be able to pull that one out. Shaw has a point about the Washington and Washington State games. Those were both winnable, both single possession games, at the final gun and in deep in the 4th quarter, obviously. So there was a chance to pull out either or both of those. But candidly, I felt at the time that both Washington State and Washington were better than us in those matchups as well. So I get his point. I think he's paid for optimism, and he's paid to kind of see if only for this, we could have gotten, over the hump. It might have played for the Pac-12 championship and or a berth in the CFP. I think that was a little bit optimistic given this year's squad and the way this year's even year schedule sets up with the number of road games that the team has to play, particularly in conference. It's always a little bit tougher. And I just don't think we were actually, ever really going to get there this year. 9-4 is nothing to be sad about. That was a pretty impressive season given what it looked like it might be, about midway through. So, hopefully it's something to build on, better health next year and good development from some of the young guys, hopefully across both lines. And maybe next year will be even better.
And Don, the way that it was stated on the broadcast, I don't know if the announcers were taking some liberties to bring the playoff extension of a Pac-12 championship into it, because I think those are based on what the Pac-12 has done in the last couple of years and the way Stanford is, even if they would have won some of the games that they needed to win a Pac-12 championship, to compare the personnel and the current state of the program and the team versus what we've seen the last couple of days in the college football playoff, I think is a bit of a stretch
Yep.
to them being able to compete quite at that level.
Yep.
Especially
absolutely.
based on what we saw against Pitt here.
Absolutely.
208 yards of total offense.